Hello and welcome to Nature Connections. Thanks to everyone who's watching this video. And in the Nature Connections interview series, I talk to people from all paths of life, but who have one thing in common, which is their connection to nature in what they do. In today's episode, I'm delighted to speak with Paul Wood. Hi, Paul, and welcome.
Hi.
Thanks so much for joining me today in this conversation. So short introduction, I would say Paul is a true tree celebrity, if we can say that. He's the author of multiple books on London's trees and even, I think, a map of London's trees. I actually have purchased multiple copies of this book, The London Street Trees. I don't know if it's the right way. It's a great gift. I've purchased multiple copies and given them out as gifts. And we'll talk more about this as well in this episode. He's also one of the co-founders of the Urban Tree Festival that just took place recently. So encourage everyone to have a look at the website as well of the Urban Tree Festival. But over to you, Paul. Tell us a bit about you. Who is Paul Wood? What's the story behind you, and what do you do, and why?
Well, yeah, that really is my name, I have to say.
Yeah,
so I really am called Paul Wood, and sort of nominative determinism has meant that I became very interested in trees when I was a kid. Really, well, nature generally, trees in particular, and that's an interest which I've had all my life. And in 2017, a book was published which had taken me about 2 years to write and research, which was the first edition of the book you had there, Camille, which was London Street Trees. That's the second edition, and it's far better because all the mistakes are corrected in that one. And so the first edition came out in 2017, and it was the result of me having written a blog before that, which is thestreettree.com, which I still do very occasionally, write a new blog post, but there's lots of resources on there. I was approached by a publisher who said that he wanted to publish a book about London street trees, and would I be interested in writing it? And I said, yeah, I'd love to, because first of all, I thought I didn't want anybody else to write that book, and I thought I knew everything. But of course, I soon discovered that I knew very little about street trees, and indeed there were loads of species which I didn't recognize and so on. So I spent a lot of time researching them, making connections, interviewing people, and doing all sorts of stuff, which was really, really fascinating to me, and really sort of jump-started my interest again, which was something which had been a very solitary interest, I suppose, since I was a kid. And then when the book was published, suddenly people were connecting with me because they'd seen this book, and I was utterly amazed because I thought I was the only person in the world who had any interest in trees, but suddenly transpired that there were lots of other people, which was fantastic because it's not something that I studied at university or anything like that. I went to art school, so my approach to it was very much trees within the landscape and the ecosystem, and it wasn't a sort of botanical or arboricultural angle that brought me to trees, I suppose. And that really is a very short potted history of where I am now, how I sort of got started in this tree authorship world, which I'm now seem to be in, and having written 3 books and the map, which you mentioned, and I'm researching another book which is about trees beyond London. So that's quite exciting. So I think I might have almost exhausted trees in London.
Do you really
Maybe
think
not. No, I don't. I don't actually at all. I just feel like maybe I've given enough. I think there's probably I've probably saturated the market.
But so are you mainly, you would call yourself an author, or what else do you do around this tree topic? Like,
yeah, I suppose an author. I sort of also regard myself as a researcher, I suppose, because a lot of it is based, or a lot of what is output is based on a lot of research. So I'm constantly sort of finding out new things, researching the history of London and trees, and now sort of further afield, and how things like how species arrived in the UK, for instance, and stories about migrations of plants and so on, which was, you know, often human enabled. And that is sort of, I think, very fascinating, and sort of there's lots of really interesting stories in there, which I hope to be able to write about soon. And then I guess I've been involved in various other tree related things, which include the Urban Tree Festival, which you mentioned now, and it's just finished its 4th year. I'm also involved with TreeTalk, which is a website and which allows you to discover trees on your street, which takes data. So I worked for many years in the technology industry, so have that background as well. And I'm also a patron of a charity in Lewisham called Street Trees for Living, that plant trees around the borough of Lewisham, which is a wonderful charity, which I think has done a huge job, a really great job in making Lewisham a much greener borough. And got lots of people from the community in Lewisham involved in tree planting and getting out there and forging a community around trees and greenery.
Building their own future in a way.
Exactly, yeah.
And so I guess most of your work is being outdoors with trees, isn't it?
Well, a surprising amount seems to be sat in front of a laptop.
Oh no.
Either writing about them, processing photographs of them, talking about them, and yeah, I mean, I like to go out and spend as much time as I can outdoors, looking at trees and experiencing them. And you know, I suppose I have been very interested in the relationship between trees and the city, and so that's been a fascinating discovery for me, has been able to go to parts of London that I never would have visited otherwise, which it sort of, you know, London never ceases to amaze, I suppose, you know, whilst you know, I would love to go and see the monkey puzzle trees in their native environment in southern Chile. I think that in the meantime, you know, give me the outer reaches of Bexley and I'm happy enough.
Well, that's wonderful. Then you haven't been too constrained during the lockdown then.
No.
But tell us more about what have you discovered in your latest trips around the UK for this new book? Anything?
Yeah, so my carbon footprint has got a bit larger as a result. So
You're not
I'm
cycling
now,
there?
no, sadly not. No, I've been to lots of towns and cities across the UK, and I suppose the thing which is interesting to me is how every town or city to some degree can be defined by the trees within it, and the trees can tell a story about the town. So somewhere I went to recently, which may not be the most glamorous place, but has some fascinating trees, is Reading, not far from London. You know, it's a sort of, I don't know what you would call it, a sort of Thames Valley commuter town, and it's full of office complexes, lots of headquarter buildings there, big shopping centre, you know, quite a lot of people live there. The Thames goes through it, but there's some fascinating trees all over the place, and particularly on the campus of the University of Reading, which used to be a parkland, which is right in the centre of town. So within this relatively small town, this whole sort of cornucopia of trees can be discovered, and that gives you a completely different sense of a place like Reading. I'm not limiting myself to Reading or indeed England or southern England, and we'll be going all over. So next month I'm going to be in Scotland for some weeks, so I'm going to be basing myself in Edinburgh and checking out the trees in towns and cities across Edinburgh. I'm hoping, and then I'll probably go to Glasgow another time as well, because Glasgow has a rich arboreal life as well, which I am very much looking forward to exploring. So I'm doing a lot of Scottish trips. I've been so far, where else have I been? Bristol, Bath, Southampton, Oxford, Sheffield, Stoke-on-Trent, and obviously London. So I'm still sort of at the fairly early stages of getting around the country, but there's lots of places I want to visit.
Very exciting. Must be a much bigger project. I guess you get a lot
of
you get a lot of sort of what is it, like leads or tips about the trees to see from local.
Yes, so I'm very much hoping that well, I very much like it when people have been getting in touch with me, and I'm encouraged that, and I have a page on my website which people can submit a tree which they think I should be aware of, and I've had some great tips through that. So if anybody watching this has some trees, go to my website, thestreettree.com, and you should find a way to let me know about trees in the town or city. Places like London, I'm pretty, I know London fairly well, but anywhere else, I'd love to hear about it, particularly in the north of England. It seems to be a bit of a green hole for me, in the sense that I don't know, what are the trees of Newcastle upon Tyne? Drawing a bit of a blank, so any help would be much appreciated.
Great. Well, I hope we can help you in some way.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind going back a bit again to your story. So you talked to us, of course, about your last name, Wood. Is that something that is actually like related to what your family was doing, or like is there some like how did you get into nature? You said you were playing around in nature, discovering nature, but what got you there, and sort of what kept you have such an attachment to trees, like from a personal perspective?
Yeah, well, I think I'm sure that my family in the generations that I've known have no connection to wood, and in fact I know that my name I think Wood is obviously it's quite a common name. My lineage is from the east coast of Scotland, which could be to do with either harvesting wood, working with wood. I don't know. I guess it must be to do with either of those activities. But
it's in your roots somewhere.
It is somewhere. But my own sort of encounter with nature, I guess, was when I was a child, and that where I lived, which was in Kent, we had a woodland behind where I lived. The house where I lived was sort of right on the edge of the town, and the street, all the gardens on the street that I lived in backed onto woodland, so which was an amazing resource for the kids who lived there, was that we could just go off and play in the woods. And so I did, and I was sort of very enamored by the wood. And when I was about 13, I suddenly realized that the trees which were formed the wood were reproducing, and there were seedlings and things like this appearing in our garden. And I started nurturing these seedlings and growing trees from seeds or little seedlings which I was digging up. And I was just fascinated by this concept that huge trees could grow from these tiny seedlings. And so I started collecting them, and then I realized that there were all these different species. And so this was when I was sort of 12 or 13, and gradually just sort of taught myself really about what the trees were, and became very sort of interested in the woodland itself as well, and that whole ecosystem of the other plants that were supported there. So there was a bit of it that was ancient, so there was some great bluebells, and then there were orchids and other sort of rare flowers and things which grew in the wood. So that whole environment, I suppose, sort of gave me a sort of love of nature. And I think the thing which sort of particularly has stood out for me has been trees, just because they're so big, they're so old, they're so magisterial. They stay in one place. There's a great mystery about them, I suppose, which I find fascinating.
Absolutely. Yeah, the last thing you said, like they stay in one place. That's always something that, like, they're just there, right? In the same place their whole life, hopefully, unless, you know, they get uprooted by us. But yet there's so much movement in them, and they're so alive in a way, and so full of energy. That's a great lesson for us, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think looking at trees in terms of our own lives is very difficult thing to comprehend, and I think that we need to think of them as these much longer lived creatures than humans, and that we need to sort of appreciate this sort of the slowness or the difference of trees, I suppose, the difference with which they their lives are to our own, and how those you know, I think only once you sort of get a concept of that can you start to sort of appreciate what they are and what they do and so on, and become increasingly interested in them.
Of course. And actually, and you were mentioning earlier that you know, there's like sort of a really big interest, like from the moment you published your first book, and there was a great response, and you know, it seemed like lots of people are actually really interested in trees, and you're not the only one. And it really feels like, you know, this has been something increasing, especially in the last year and a half, with us being sort of a lot more connected to nature. And yeah, what are your thoughts on this? Do you feel this sort of bigger
Absolutely. I
yearning,
mean,
or yeah?
I think there is a wave of interest in nature generally, and you know, from my perspective, certainly there's been an increased interest in trees as a part of that. And I guess maybe during lockdown, particularly for those of us living in cities, we've been very conscious of these. As we've slowed down, we've noticed things differently, and trees are these things which are there all over the city, and we have been able to appreciate them in a different way. We've been able to spend longer with them. Our attention for them has been heightened, perhaps because of the situation that humans have found themselves in. And so I guess that might be something to do with it. But I think even before COVID, trees, an appreciation of what trees can do and the benefits they offer has been increasing. Or so, for instance, you know, politicians have been talking about planting trees for the last few years, which is great. But I think we also need to think about the notion of canopy cover rather than the number of trees that we have. And I think that there are also sort of, you know, there's a long history of people that have been interested in trees and have planted trees and have seen the benefits of trees at different times in our history. And so there is there is a long lineage of tree appreciation. It's not new in one sense, but we have many people have acquired an interest for the first time, perhaps. And when you realize that interest is something which is, you know, part of a long human association with trees, it kind of might be interesting to put it into a bit of context.
Absolutely. It definitely seems like I mean, like it comes in waves. Like there's always been this connection, this exploration, you know, artistically, scientifically, etc. But sometimes we get further away from it when we get, you know, hooked by other things, and then we come back to it, and and definitely it feels like at the moment we're realizing like there is this whole history around like, you know, this presence of trees in our lives, and it's really fascinating. I'm reading a book at the moment. It's called, I think, the Wood Age, about how like the life of man is intimately tied to the life and to trees, and that
Yeah.
everything in our development, every single sort of passage has been linked to trees in a way. And I mean, I'm personally discovering all this. I didn't know about the whole history. So, and one thing actually that that you mentioned, of course, is this, you know, during lockdowns, like the walks we took and like noticing the trees a lot more. And one of the things that definitely helped me during the last year was your app, the TreeTalk, and your website. And you told us a little bit about that. You know, it's really an extraordinary idea. I love this idea of, you know, doing I would call it tree tourism, like walking around and, you know, and instead of, you know, going for the pubs, you go for the trees. You don't, you hit certain trees. And thanks to you, I discovered that I have a really quite a rare, actually, I think it's a Japanese loquat across from, how do you say loquat? Yeah, across from my house. So can you tell us a bit more about this project and this idea and sort of where you're at and you know, what is the future?
It's a collaboration between, there are three of us involved in it, and we've been working on it for about 4 years actually. And the reason we started doing it was because the data was there, and my background and my collaborators was all within technology, and we thought, what can we do with this data? How do we make it more usable? So the GLA, the Greater London Authority, which is the mayor essentially, made the data available for anybody to use in any way that they wanted to. And we felt that this was a great resource that could be made available to people. So that's pretty much what we've been doing over the last 4 years. And since then, it's sort of become it's become more than a project. It's become a business, really, in the sense that we've been able to sort of turn the technology that underlies TreeTalk into a product which we can roll out for other cities, other towns, or any area, any geographic area, and add in different things. So we've just done a very specific one for Hounslow, for the London Borough of Hounslow, which maps all the trees within that borough, but also looks at how to support community groups and how the council are doing a lot of green initiatives, and hopefully it will become a hub for all of the things which they're doing. But trees are, I think, a very core part of that, because of all the benefits they do, but also because of the static nature of them, and the fact that they can be mapped has made them, I suppose, landmarks, mappable, and the points by which people can navigate through a walk, which was the idea with TreeTalk.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful idea to be navigating and seeing the space. Actually, the map, instead of being sort of flat, suddenly becomes like vertical, and you're looking at the space around you, not like through the streets and your direct eye almost, but you're looking up, you're looking around. Like, it also gives us a very different experience of the space around us, with the presence of this defining presence, which are the trees. They're everywhere, right? I love that, really. I'm looking forward to seeing what else, what comes out of this project in the future, because I can very well see like a European, like tree tourism.
That would be great.
Functionality, and like you'd go visit, the trees of Italy in that specific. You'd do a tour of Rome on, looking at the trees, and
yeah, I think it would be amazing to do that. And in a sense, all it requires is the data. So I think more and more cities are beginning to make this data available, because it's been there for a long time, because the people who are responsible for looking after trees and managing trees in public places have systems which locate those trees, and they can write reports about them, because there is a whole infrastructure which looks after and manages trees in cities, which many people may not be surprised about, and that it is, you know, quite a significant part of what councils have to do within their environments. So the data exists, it's just not yet quite in the public domain. And I think gradually we're going to see a shift of that data being something which was used primarily for people managing trees to locate them and write reports and so on, for that to become something which is available for all the residents of cities to be able to find new ways of exploring them and do all sorts of things which we maybe haven't even thought of yet.
And so you mentioned a little bit earlier about well, you actually just mentioned the benefits of trees, but so what are some of the benefits of trees, from being surrounded by them, you know, also observing them? Like, what are some of the benefits?
Well, there's all the sort of environmental benefits, which are, you know, so very basically a tree is a fairly large carbon store. So a living tree, it represents carbon. The wood of a tree is carbon, that's stored carbon until we burn it. Trees can moderate temperatures. So on a hot day, by having a tree-lined street, if you're walking down a tree-lined street or you live on a tree-lined street, the trees are actually going to reduce the temperature and make it more bearable to be there. In the winter, they can moderate rainfall through actually soaking, well, and in the summer through canopy cover will soak up, not soak up, but will disperse rain in a way which means that, you know, this is obvious, you're sheltered under the canopy of a tree, but that's maybe worth just thinking about. They can prevent flash flooding. So having more trees means that groundwater will be soaked up. Having tree pits around street trees allows water to disperse into the ground and not just run off the hard surfaces. And then, of course, the pollution that we are all living with in cities, trees can really help soak that up by just becoming a magnet for pollution in some ways. And that's those are some of the benefits they give us. Obviously, they also provide oxygen as well. And there are many other benefits which I can't quite think of at the moment that will be clear. But maybe the thing which is most exciting, or the most important one, is their presence, just their physical presence, which is sort of more of a intangible benefit, which we appreciate as humans, and the relationship that humans have with trees. I think means it's clear through you know, research that shows that the greener parts of cities are always in the wealthiest parts of cities. So people want to live with trees. They you know, all these sorts of things are the benefits that trees provide us, I think.
Yeah, of course. No, I mean, thanks for highlighting all the the environmental benefits, because it's not always obvious. I mean, some of us learned this in school, and then, you know, you kind of forget as you're walking past the trees. But yes, the intangible benefits, and I love that there's this correlation between the wealthiest neighborhoods and the greenest neighborhoods. I didn't know this. I mean, in general, I definitely feel like I personally seek out, you know, a leafy place to live, definitely, and it's this calling, really, like to just have this green presence next to us, and it just feels like calming, and just feels like there's something almost like bigger than us, you know, like it's not just an urban built environment. There's something like connecting us to like real, like the origin of life, you know, like our biological selves almost. this connection to nature. So I love that. And I wanted to ask you a bit more about the Urban Tree Festival. How did that come about? How did you decide to co-found this, and sort of what is the goal of it?
Well, I think it's evolving, but it started out very low key thing. There used to be a thing called the London Tree Week that was run by the Mayor of London, and about 4 years ago, the funding dried up for that, and so a few people that were involved in that thought, well, we could still run a few events perhaps at the same time that used to run. And myself and the other, I think there were 3 other people that were involved in it, which centered around the Museum of Walking, who I still do quite a lot of work with. And that was organized a series of events which were outdoors. There must have been 4 or 5. It was over a long weekend, maybe up to 12 events over a long weekend, all real life events. And then we did that for 2 years. The 3rd year we were planning something similar. We had more ambitious plans, and we'd roped in a few partners like the Horniman Museum, and it coincided with the tree exhibition at the Hayward Gallery, and so I was going to be doing some events there, which I was really looking forward to. And unfortunately, all of that suddenly had to be cancelled because of COVID, and so we pivoted online and ran the 3rd tree festival, Urban Tree Festival, online in 2020, which suddenly enabled the audience to get much broader, much more geographically diverse, generally diverse, and allowed us to put on many different events which weren't necessarily all about London. And this year we've built on that. We've had events and activities from all over the UK and beyond. We've had an audience which also comes from all over the world, and it's largely been online. So I think the future will be more dispersed, not London centric. It's going to be probably be a hybrid online and real life festival. But I think we've proved over the last 4 years that there's a huge appetite for celebrating trees in many different ways. I mean, the Urban Tree Festival is a very broad church. It has sort
very
of, as you've seen it, probably you've seen some of the sort of professional arboricultural presentations at one hand, through to much more esoteric stuff around our relationships with trees, and things like, there was a great event which was called The Sounds of Plants, which was about hooking up plants to actually listen to music which they could produce. So these, all sorts of, and everything in between, I guess.
And your big debate, the London plane versus the hornbeam. I won't spoil the end, but if you're listening, you have to go. I think there's the recording available.
Yeah, they're all. There's a YouTube channel of the Urban Tree Festival, so check it out there. I think everything is pretty much everything that we recorded is being uploaded. I think we've pretty much have everything done now. There's still a few things struggling to get edited and uploaded, but largely there. And the one that you mentioned, the true tree of London, the debate of the century,
the big debate,
is definitely available.
Oh, wonderful, great. That was an epic moment, I have to say. And do you know actually of similar, because you speak about it, everything that you're doing, like with the Urban Tree Festival, like reaching new dimensions geographically, let's say. Do you know of anyone else doing what you're doing in other countries, or have you sort of branched out internationally? And
well, I know of people in other cities around the world. So for instance, cities that have I've met people in London that have come to London to look at. So this is tree tourism of coming to London. So I mainly connect with people through social media, I guess. And I've met people from LA, San Francisco, Melbourne. So those are just a few, but there are, you know, particularly on Instagram, there are Instagram accounts of trees in cities across the world. So Paris, Barcelona, and many other places. There's also Delhi is a place which is on my radar as somewhere where there's tree people kind of doing, you know, who are interested in trees in the cities, probably in different ways than I am, but nevertheless, there is definitely a network of people forming around the world that are involved in urban trees in one way or another, and they're beginning to come together through social media and the internet.
It's wonderful. Great. Who knows? Maybe a collaborative book, a worldwide of worldwide urban trees.
Yeah. Well, I think probably the next step would be an international chapter of the Urban Tree Festival, and that could well be on the cards, I think. Great.
I just have a few more questions for you. The first one is, I mean, you were talking about your childhood, sort of planting trees and collecting these seeds and look at them grow. And actually, you just before we started the recording, were showing me your garden. I'm curious, your tree garden. I'm curious to know, like, you know, how do you bring sort of this connection to nature into your life, apart from the obvious is what you do? But is there anything like on a routine basis that you do every day? Obviously, you grow those trees. Is that your way of connecting in your home and your life to?
I guess, yeah. I mean, I should say your description of my tree garden sounds like something akin to Kew Gardens, but what it is it's a 4 meter square patio which has a load of trees in pots.
Exactly. anywhere you live in a small urban area, you can still grow your trees.
Exactly. Yeah. So I have no soil that is in the ground. This is on the first floor, and so yeah, that's I wish that I had a proper garden where I could grow trees, but I suppose I usually pick up as many seeds and things as I can in the autumn, plant them and see what appears in the following spring. And so I have all manner of unusual trees which I nurture through in pots through the rest of the year. And then after a few years, I start thinking, who can I give this to in order to give it a more of a chance of a life? Because obviously I've got no room. I can't plant them. So I'm always looking for people to take my seedlings, and I have quite a few seedlings ready to go.
Yeah, it's a lovely thing to do. It's a very simple thing. Like anyone can pick up a seed and in autumn and plant it, and on a small pot on the balcony, and or even on a windowsill, and see where it grows. What happens?
Yeah, and obviously, well, not obviously, but actually, what happens is I get quite a lot of windblown stuff just appearing. So I'm sure anybody that has a garden will have all sorts of trees which come up, like ash trees and so on. And so these, I get these seedlings which appear in my pots, and I kind of, like to keep them going as well. It's interesting to see what appears in London. I have noticed Turkish hazel appeared in one of my pots. That wasn't something I planted. And I had a plane tree that appeared a few years ago. Unfortunately, that didn't last, but there are all sorts of
things. They're
things.
Just coming to visit Paul Wood. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Giving back to you.
Yeah.
I love that. A last quick question, which is something I ask every time, is there a specific tree in your life that's particularly meaningful or that evokes a memory for you?
Well,
type of tree, not necessarily one tree. But...
Yeah, well, there's all sorts. I often get asked what's my favorite tree, and the truth is it changes the whole time. So I think that my favorite species, I suppose the species which I always come back to, or the thing which maybe defines what I do most is the London Plain, because we are surrounded by them. They're magnificent. They speak about human relations with plants in a very contemporary way, because they are the product of human interference. They are very much the tree of cities. They don't exist except in cities. So I think they're very fascinating. And then an individual tree, I think there are quite a few trees that I kind of know individually, and I think some that I'm particularly drawn to. I live in North London, and so a few round here are there's an almond tree on Stroud Green Road, which is my first tree of the spring. It flowers really, really early, February or even end of January if it's been a really mild winter. And it has a great big corkscrew trunk, which is fascinating. And I always post about it on my social media. So if anybody's seen, they can scroll back and find it in February. It flowered amazingly this year. It's a beautiful tree, and it is opposite Nando's on the Stroud Green Road in Finsbury Park, and it just is a landmark for me, and I think for many people that live around here as well. And it's the first harbinger of spring because it flowers so early and so beautifully as well.
What a finish. I'll definitely pay the almond tree a visit. I haven't been introduced yet, so I'll go introduce myself, and
yeah,
I won't wait until this spring, but
yeah, you should. It has plenty of almonds on them, and I've never actually taken one, but I have had it on good authority that they are inedible. So any foragers out there, be warned.
Maybe you can plant one instead.
Maybe, yeah, good idea.
Great, thank you so much, Paul. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to share with us, or something we haven't.
Trees.
About. Yeah, trees. We love trees, right?
Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. It's been wonderful hearing all about your projects and the way you bring trees to us in a way, and you make us appreciate them and notice them and understand them. So thanks so much, and I really look forward to your next books.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll be sharing your social media, website, everything on the side in the comments, so everyone can easily access that as well.
Great. Okay, well, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Bye, Paul.